Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation Better Life series. Today's presentation is Wheelchair Selection with Gary Karp. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. As a reminder, this presentation is being recorded Wednesday, March 20th, 2013. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Gary Karp. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to have you here today. We're going to talk about wheelchair selection, or what I'm referring to as the modern manual wheelchair. Now, I'm focusing on manual wheelchairs here, but know that much of what we're going to talk about will be relevant to power wheelchair users as well. But the examples that you'll be seeing throughout, and some of the specifics are particularly about manual wheelchair users. So for those of you who don't know me, you're still not going to recognize me because here I am in 1973 in my first, then state-of-the-art, standard issue Everest and Jennings narrow adult, so-called lightweight wheelchair. I was 18 years old when I fell out of a tree. I injured my spinal cord at T12 and L1. And those of you who might know me are going to recognize me a little better now, almost 40 years later, here in my rigid frame, ultralight titanium wheelchair. So these pictures are not only to show you how much I have aged, but to also make the point that wheelchairs have come a very, very long way since the beginning for me as a wheelchair user, and in fact in recent years. And one of the most important aspects of this presentation today is to talk about this increased sophistication of wheelchairs, which means that how we select them, how we get the right one, is a lot more involved because there are many, many more choices. I'm speaking not only from my own personal experience with this, but also as an author and a journalist. And my book, Life on Wheels, first came out in 1999. This is the second edition that came out a couple years ago, fully updated. And in this book is a chapter called Wheelchair Selection. I've also done a number of articles for New Mobility magazine on this topic, and I've been a close follower of the world of wheelchairs. So I've got both personal and professional orientation to share with you. So why are we having this session today? Well, first of all, by being more sophisticated, wheelchairs are much more complex. And that means that you have a lot more that you need to learn in order to make the range of very important choices and the many different choices you have to make when you're specifying a wheelchair. Because if you haven't taken a look at a wheelchair order form, this is simply one portion only having to do with rear wheels from a typical wheelchair order form. It's pretty daunting, even for me sometimes. It can be a little daunting. So we're going to talk specifically about the criteria that will help you be able to deal with this range of choices in order to know why you're going to make a certain choice that is relevant for you. Okay? Wheelchairs in being improved means that your potential for greater mobility is higher than it's ever been in the past. And we, of course, mobility is what it's all about. We want to make sure that you're getting the most out of that. And with mobility comes greater independence. And independence is very, very important to those of us who've lost whatever degree of physical ability and mobility. Whatever independence we can maintain and optimize is really a priority, and that's what we care about here. But it's also about being healthy. And having the right chair does have direct consequences for your health in ways that we're going to talk about. But this is not something that you just choose yourself. This is a process, selecting a wheelchair, that is a partnership between you and hopefully you have a relationship to work with a qualified therapist, usually a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, but generally somebody who really has taken the time to understand this whole world of wheelchairs, but also is able to understand the facts of your body and your capacity in order to put it all together to identify the right chair for you. And the two of you are working with the dealer, because the therapist can't know the entire product line out there. It's too immense. It's too involved. So you know what you want to do with your life. You know what your tastes are. You know what your preferences are. The therapist knows your body and how that relates to the chair, and the dealer knows the products. So it's the partnership of the three of you, which is really what's going to make this happen best. Now, look how far wheelchairs have come, not just from that chair that you saw me sitting in the beginning, but going way, way back to these cane back style chairs that were for pushing people around in. These chairs were not intended for people to have independent control of their mobility. That's not what the designers of these chairs were thinking about so much. But that's exactly what we're interested in now. We're interested in you having the most control of your mobility. So a few core features about the new modern wheelchair that changed since the days of the cane-back chair and my old Everest and Jennings tank, we like to call them. First of all, that a lot of adjustability has been introduced into wheelchairs. And for those of you who are specifying a first wheelchair, that you have a recent onset of paralysis, adjustability is very important to you, because you need to get out and live with this first chair and have some ability to control some of the characteristics of the chair. For instance, the angle of the back or the position of the main axle, both things that we'll look at specifically. But then as you get experienced with your chair, such as myself, then the chair becomes more highly customized. You don't need adjustability because you know the dimensions that work for you. And now wheelchairs are built from scratch for each individual, which is really why that order form has to be so immense and you have all those different choices. But unfortunately, a lot of the images of wheelchair users that are still out there in the world, for those of you who are new to this milieu, you bring with you a lot of imagery and a lot of belief and stereotype about what it is to be a wheelchair user that really doesn't fit reality. And this is just one of the worst I've ever seen. I have gone looking through some of the stock photo libraries out there, and there is very little accurate imagery of wheelchair users. And this is about as bad as it gets. This young woman, she's slumping over to the side. She's having to extend her arms way out far. The chair is just totally wrong for her. Clearly there is no customization whatsoever, and she has had no support or guidance to get the right chair. So what it's about is about choosing well for you, for your body, for your physical capacity, for the places that you will go, for the place that you live, place that you work, for how your chair will be transported. These are very individual things that you need to bring to the process of wheelchair selection. Nobody else knows any of that but you. Right? And again, the top priority is to be as independent as possible, to not need to be pushed in the chair, to not need to be lifted in the chair, to not need to have other people handling your chair unless it actually is the right thing to do. But if it's because you got the wrong chair, that's what you want to avoid. Okay? So again, I can't emphasize this enough. It is a team effort. You need to get together with the right people to optimize the success of these choices. And you need to learn about wheelchairs, which is why I'm so pleased that I can share this information with you today, because this is really where it starts. The more you understand the details we're about to look at, then the better a role you can play in that team process of specifying your wheelchair. And I want to urge you to go to the various websites of whatever wheelchair makers you can find. Here's a selection of them: Quickie, Cushall, Colors, Top End, Highlight, Key Mobility. There are others. These are all makers of manual chairs. Some of them make power chairs as well. Okay? But you really should go to their websites, look at the range of their products, download some of those order forms, and without letting yourself get too overwhelmed, just start to get familiar with the choices that are made. Now, there's a variety of criteria that you want to have in mind while this process happens. These are the overarching qualities that you're interested in. First, number one, most important, that it optimize your independent mobility. The next is efficiency. Efficiency in the use of your body, that you not be overusing your energy, that you not be unnecessarily fatigued. There are people out there who find themselves really drained by the end of the day using a manual wheelchair and might think that because of that they should be using a power wheelchair. But it may well be that they have the wrong chair, that it is configured wrong for their particular needs, that it's not maintained properly, and then that is going to add up to wasting your energy, being inefficient with the use of your energy. So when you specify the right chair and configure it well and take care of it properly, then you're more likely to be able to push yourself over the course of a full day and not be unnecessarily fatigued. This is also about safety. Safety in a few different ways. Obviously, you want to be well fit to the chair so you don't fall out of it. That's probably the top safety issue. But also that you have confident control of the chair, that when you are going down a ramp or you're on an incline of some kind or you get into some bumpy situation, that you can reliably maintain control of your wheelchair. Right? But it's also about safety in terms of protection from overuse. So once again, if the chair is poorly configured and not right for you, then you are more likely to be at risk of, for instance, overstraining your shoulders. So safety is a big component of what we're talking about. As is comfort. I spend a lot of hours in my wheelchair every day, and I cover a lot of territory. And so having the chair properly configured to support you reliably and to be able to be easy to use means that you need to be comfortable in the chair. Wheelchairs are not really designed for comfort. They're designed for mobility. So there's an innate contradiction, in a way, in wheelchair design, that the way it needs to be configured so that you can propel it as efficiently as possible and as safely as possible doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be as comfortable as possible if you're sitting in it for a long stretch. I find that if I go to a conference or a meeting of some kind and for a day or certainly for a couple of days or 3 days where I'm having to sit through presentations, that gets uncomfortable for anybody, but the wheelchair is really not optimal for that. It's not a lazy boy recliner. But all of this is to say that you do have some influence over how comfortable you're going to be in the chair, and you want to have that in mind as you configure it while you optimize it for mobility. And the final criteria is about mastery. When the chair is configured well, then you are going to gain greater and greater skill at propelling yourself using the chair, whether it's manual or whether it's power. You're going to get good at using it. When it's not properly configured, then it could be continually awkward for you. You could never get to that point of really fluid, natural, just an extension of your own body, and it can become as natural as walking is for anybody else. Okay. So those are the criteria that we're interested in: mobility, efficiency, safety, comfort, mastery. Okay, so talking about manual wheelchairs now, we're going to come down to, actually I'm hesitating a little bit because I realized that I left out a slide about the choice of manual or power. So I'm just going to take a moment on the side and just very briefly talk about that. Manual wheelchairs are used obviously by people who have upper body strength and use of their arms. Power wheelchairs are clearly used by people who don't have the use of their arms. They might use puff and sip control or something of that sort, or that the use of the strength of their upper body is very, very limited. But there is an in-between category of people who do have the ability to use their arms and their upper body to a degree enough to push a manual wheelchair, but they might be on the edge where daily use of a manual chair could result in really overstraining them and causing some injuries. So it's that population, for instance, that low to medium quadriplegia range, that C6, C7, C5 range of spinal cord injury, for instance, where somebody wants to use a manual chair, but you have to really take the time to determine whether full-time use of a manual chair would be really right for you in the long term, because you don't want to risk damaging your shoulders. Okay, so for those of us using manual wheelchairs, now the choice is about folding or rigid, and I'm going to go over some criteria about each, starting with the folding wheelchair, which is what we see here, and it looks pretty similar to the folding chair that I used when I first was a wheelchair user in 1973, but these chairs are lighter weight than that chair was. These chairs are better engineered. They're tighter. They're more efficient, and they do have more options than the folding chairs of the past do. So they still are valid for many people. They generally are heavier than the rigid frame chair because they've just got extra hardware. Just the folding structure adds to the weight of the chair, right? But the thing about the folding chair is that when you push on the wheels, it causes the frame to flex. The frame has to be flexible because it has to be able to fold. But when that frame flexes, that means some of the force that you applied to the wheels to push it get used up. They get kind of absorbed in the flexing of the frame and don't translate as efficiently into forward movement. That was the whole idea of the rigid frame design, was to, in an engineering sense, translate the force of the push more efficiently into forward motion. So you lose a little bit of that when you have a folding frame. But again, the engineering of folding chairs has improved really considerably in recent years to try to minimize that. The angle of the back in a folding wheelchair is fixed because those canes, they're called, the uprights, and I've got my handy little tool here, these uprights that support the back of the chair are part of the structure of the chair. So there is no way for them to be able to move and change the angle. So when you specify a folding chair, you have to be very, very clear about specifying the right angle, because the correct angle, because you don't get to change it as you do with rigid chairs. Generally, folding wheelchairs have removable footrests. You can see it sort of sits on a structure right here, and there's a little lever in here, which you flip, and then the footrest will just swing around. And, I'm having a lot of fun drawing with this stuff, and flip away. Very often people need flip-away footrests in order to get the footrest out of the way in order to do transfers. There are many people who have some ability to stand, some degree of ambulation, and swing-away footrests actually are important for them, which is something that would lead them to choose a folding frame rather than a rigid frame generally. Okay. And of course, the big deal with the folding frame is that it collapses horizontally, as we see here now. It may be very necessary for you to slip the wheelchair away, perhaps at work or some place that you might typically go with friends or family, or to be able to load the wheelchair in the trunk. Sometimes people have a car with a trunk that is too small to be able to load the frame of a rigid chair. And we'll see a picture of what that looks like in a little bit. And so the folding wheelchair tends to be a better solution, because it might be the only way you can get it in the trunk, because, again, you can remove the footrests as well. In most chairs, you can also remove the wheels. And so it may be that for transporting the chair, that would be a reason that you would choose a folding chair as the best solution for you. Okay. Now, rigid chairs, otherwise often known as ultra-lightweight wheelchairs. And I think you can see just from this image how the structure of the chair has been pared down to the bare minimum. There's no more cross frame in here. There is not even any more structure that comes like down this way or over here. Even in the early rigid frames, there was a lot more hardware on the chair. But now they have been taken down to such an efficient structure that literally it is nothing but this L shape here on each side, which is one of the ways that the chair becomes so much more lighter. So everything is all integrated into the frame, and that means that the footrest is actually part of the structure. It's actually part of what makes the whole frame rigid, that it doesn't have a swing-away structure to it. That's why the footrest is integrated into the frame, because it's literally part of what makes the rigid frame design possible. The weight has come down in some chairs to typical for an ultralight chair is in the mid 20-pound range, but some of them are even lighter than that. Of course, there are options, and in my case, I've got a bag that sits on the back of the chair, and I've got a little pouch that sits under the chair, and I probably add another 6 or 7 pounds to the weight of my chair just with all the stuff that I carry around. But the basic weight of the chair is in the low to mid 20-pound range for an ultralight chair, whereas a folding chair could be in the 30 to 40-pound range. My first chair, that old Everson Jennings chair, was actually over 50 pounds by the time you added the kinds of cushioning that we used in those days. So these chairs are much, much more energy efficient in terms of the use of your energy, of your physical energy over the course of the day. Because the rigid frame doesn't flex, that means when you push on those wheels, that force is going to translate much more efficiently into forward movement. Also, rigid frame chairs tend to coast longer on a given push, which means that to go a certain distance, it takes fewer pushes to go there, which means that you exert yourself less physically to go a given distance in an ultralight chair than you would in a folding chair. Now, if the nature of your lifestyle is that you're not wheeling long distances, if you're a college student, for instance, and you've got to cross campus, well, that might make a case for the rigid chair being that much more important to you. But if you're not somebody who's going to be, wheeling substantial distances over the course of a normal day, then these things won't be as critically important for you. All right. There is more adjustability in the rigid frame. As I said before, the back angle can be adjusted on these rigid chairs, depending on the particular engineering design here, but you can see there's this little plate that is right here at the corner, which makes it possible for the angle of the chair back to be adjusted. Because the structure of the back itself is not part of the structure of the overall chair. This is the structure of the overall chair here. Okay, so that is one of the benefits of the rigid frame design, is that it freed up the back to be able to be adjustable. Another adjustability feature, and we'll see it in more detail in a little bit, is the forward and backwards motion of the main axle itself. Let me make all this red stuff go away so that you can see, in this case, it clamps onto the frame and allows you to slide it, to loosen it up and slide it forward and back a little bit to adjust center of gravity. And we'll tell you more detail about that in just a moment. Okay. Now, rigid chairs also always have quick release wheels. You can see here that the person they're pushing a button on the end of the axle, and then the axle right here slides in and out of the frame. Okay. And now, as I promised, here is what a rigid frame chair looks like when the wheels have been removed and when the back, which would have been like, I'm trying to do a little perspective drawing for you here, more like up here, and now it has been flipped down. And this is what you get when you have completely collapsed a rigid frame chair. It can be a little bulky, but they're so light that it's much, much easier to handle, for instance, for putting it inside and outside of your car. And in fact, I have done a few videos for the Reeve Foundation. You go to their website at paralysis.org, and you go to the video section, and you'll see a series of wonderful videos called Reeve Minutes. And one of them that I did for them shows you how I load my wheelchair in and out of the car, and you can see how the way the frame collapses down facilitates that. Okay. All right, so that's the general relative conversation about folding and rigid frame chairs. Now, when you look at that order form, you're going to see illustrations like this. Another one of these things that can just make your head explode is there are all these different things, all these different measurements that you have to come up with some answer for in order to specify the frame, because again, they're built very, very, very custom. So in order to start measuring for your frame, and I'm going to give you some specifics about the process of how to measure for your wheelchair frame. But the first thing that happens is you have to make a decision about your cushion. And your cushion is first and foremost about pressure distribution. It's about protecting your body, particularly your butt, from the danger of decubitus ulcers, of pressure sores, of skin breakdown. This is really super critical, and it is actually the most important thing you need to be concerned about while you're specifying your chair is to ensure that your skin is going to be safe, and the cushion is the first piece of that. And there are a variety of different kinds of cushion technologies that are out there. There is a cushion that is filled with air, such as the Rojo product here, and there are others out there, so I'm not expressing any favoritism toward any particular product. But it's as you can see, this particular design is a series of little balloons, and they are literally filled with air. Being filled with air also means that they can leak. So when you use an air cushion, you have to be very vigilant about being sure that it's properly inflated, and have a repair kit with you, and really pay attention, because if the air goes out of it, you can find yourself sitting on a hard surface and losing circulation on your bottom and maybe not know what's happening. That's not the case for not using air. Lots and lots of people use them. I have one that I use in my car, and I use it when I travel on the airplane and so on. The next type of cushion is a gel type, and we're seeing that type right here. And this is literally filled with a highly engineered gel, which is designed in order to facilitate this even distribution of pressure along your skin, which is what you want to achieve, generally along your legs. Okay? Gel cushions tend to be heavier, certainly than air cushions. Gel cushions also can leak and also require a little daily maintenance. You want to knead, like kneading dough for making bread. You've got to keep that gel loose inside that cushion and not let it, so it can bunch up sometimes in one place. So it involves a little bit of day-to-day management. The next type of cushion is polyurethane. In this case, this is a product which has polyurethane, meaning there's no air, there's no gel, there's nothing in it. It's just the material itself in a honeycomb kind of design. And that allows air to travel through it. They also have a network of little holes all throughout it so that not only air but moisture can pass through it. And this particular cushion design tends to have three levels: the really firm one on the bottom, softer in the middle, and then the top one tends to be softer and cushier. And you can see in this case, this cushion also has some sculpting in the design of the cushion, by the way, as does this gel cushion that we're showing up here on top. Okay. There are some other technologies as well, but this is just to give you a very, very basic grounding in the fact that there are a variety of cushion technologies out there. Some of them are even custom made for you, that they can sit you on this device, and it literally will take the shape of your body, and then they can literally manufacture a cushion according to that. Or they can start with foam. Foam technologies are very sophisticated now too, and they might even sort of start cutting out bits of the foam or shaving it and sculpting it in order to create one for you. But the point is that the cushion not only protecting you from skin breakdown, it also gives you greater stability in the chair. It has something to do with your being able to maintain good posture, because you want to maintain good spinal posture in your chair. And you can't begin to measure your chair until you know the cushion you're going to use. You can't even start the process. you have to identify the cushion first because the thickness of the cushion has to be taken into account for the actual measurements of the chair. And I'm going to show you this right now as soon as I take a sip of tea. Okay. So the first dimension that you're going to be concerned with is the front seat to floor height. And again, on every wheelchair order form, you're going to see a space where you've got to put in a number for the number of inches from the front edge of the seat to the floor. And we're talking about front seat to floor because rear seat to floor is something different. We're going to get to that in a minute, but you start with the front seat to floor. So here we can see this is me in my previous chair. The minimum dimension that you want to come up with starts with the minimum clearance of the floor, and that's this dimension here. You need to allow at least 2 to 2.5 inches. I usually say 2.5 inches to the sole of your shoe, and that accounts for a little bit of thickness of the foot plate itself. So you start with, you need to be 2.5 inches off the floor. This is very, very critical because, for instance, when you're going down a ramp, going down an incline of some kind, your toes are going to get to the level ground once the surface levels out before your main wheels do. And if you are too close to the ground, your toes or even the front plate of the footrest itself will make contact with that pavement before you level out, which means that your chair is going to stop, and it means that you are going to fall out. So this is a crucial safety point, is to begin with a minimum distance from the foot plate to the ground. Then you're going to measure from the sole. You're going to add, right? So we've got 2.5 inches from the floor. Now we're going to add the dimension from the bottom of your sole to the bottom of your thigh, to right here. Okay? So now that means is that we have this distance. Okay, we've made these two steps. Start with the minimum, add the distance to your thigh. But the front edge of the seat itself is actually here. See this? Right there. So that means that the next thing we need to do is we need to subtract the thickness of the cushion. And this is why I made such a strong point about you have to know the cushion first, because you have to know this thickness here. And that's not the physical thickness of the cushion. That's the distance from where your thigh is, right? Your thigh is going to settle into the cushion to some degree. So that is really the dimension that you have to subtract from the whole, so that then you end up with this dimension here for your front seat to floor. Okay? I hope that made sense. And it's so crucial that it be right, because this is really what allows you to have full contact along your thighs with the cushion. If your thigh is not in full contact with the cushion, then, and you're going to have to kind of picture your butt kind of out here, if you will. Let's see if I can kind of fake the body over here. There we go. If your thighs are out of contact with the cushion here, away from the cushion, there we go. And what it means is that you are going to end up with more physical force on your bottom, which is going to put you at risk of skin breakdown. So this issue of having contact at the thigh with the cushion is super critical. Okay? Now, you do your best to specify it when you order the chair, but also you can see there's a little bit of adjustability with the foot plate here. So this is one of the things that you do with adjustability when you get the chair, is you tweak the foot plate height up or down a little bit in order to guarantee that you've got the right contact pressure with your legs against the cushion. All right, so now, why do we want to talk about rear seat to floor height? Well, because the angle of the seat is influenced by that. Most of us wheelchair users do not do best in a chair where the seat is level parallel to the floor. We actually need a little bit of angle of the seat in order to be stable. And that's a term that's called dump or squeeze. I believe in Britain and Australia and New Zealand they use the term squeeze. generally in the U.S. we use the term dump to talk about that angle of the seat, that the rear of the seat will be lower than the front. How much dump is going to be a function of your upper body balance, which generally is going to be a function of the nature of your disability. In the case of spinal cord injury, it's a function of the level of your injury. Because my spinal cord injury is relatively low at T12, I have use of my torso and even the muscles of my pelvis and hips. That means that I don't need as much dump because I'm pretty stable. But somebody who has a higher level up in the thoracic, the mid to upper thoracic range, then you need more dump in order to be more stable in the chair. If you are not stable in your chair, then you're not going to be able to use your upper body strength, your arms and your shoulders, as efficiently, because you'll have to actually be using some of that muscle exertion to keep yourself feeling stable in the chair. But when the chair really has you, when your body is really fit well to it, and you have a little bit of stability from squeeze, that actually frees up your physical capacity of your arms and shoulders to be able to propel the chair more efficiently, and that is also part of safety, protecting you from being injured in the chair. So stability and balance is what you get from the appropriate amount of dump. And now I think you can see this is why having the therapist there is pretty important, because the therapist has the training to help identify how much angle you want to have in that seat so that you have balance and so that you can make the most of your physical strength while you're healing. But you don't want too much dump, and there are two reasons for that. One of them is because you need to be able to transfer yourself in and out of the chair, and the more angle you have in that seat, you can imagine if it's, let's go to a different color because of that orange frame there. I can get a green. There we go. This is fun. If you really have a lot more angle in that seat, obviously I'm really exaggerating it here, but imagine what it's like to try and lift your body out of that chair. So you don't want any more dump than necessary that's one reason, so that you can do your transfers safely and according to your level of strength. But an even more important reason not to have too much dump is because the more angle you have in the seat, then the more your pelvis gets rotated forward, and that tends to take the curve out of your spine. In other words, too much dump in the seat is not really healthy for your spine. And so that means that you really want to find that right spot. Now, there are some rigid wheelchairs that are out there who have the ability to adjust the dump of the chair itself. You might make choices within a certain range, but you'll find some that will have kind of a joint here at this particular point. This chair is not one of them, but that will and has a structure back here somewhere that allows you to make some live changes to the dump of the chair. But for the most part, you're going to specify that when you order the chair. Okay, now we're going to talk about seat depth. This is actually not an ideal picture for seat depth, because what I'm really talking about is depth from this front edge to the back of the chair, right? So this is the dimension here. Obviously, it's hard to draw straight lines as I do this, okay? But this is the depth that we're talking about of the seat, and it's really important. But I'm showing this here. Oh boy, I want to make a big mess of things, because what you're interested in is as much contact along your thigh, not just actually having contact because of the height issue we talked about before, but now also how much of the cushion you're actually in contact with. I've seen many, many people whose thighs extend way out beyond this front edge of the cushion, which means that they are missing out on contact with the cushion in this whole part of their thigh, which means that, again, more force ends up applied to your bottom. But you also need to make sure that the chair seat depth is not too long, because if you have contact behind your knee, then what that's going to do is it's going to prevent you from being able to slide all the way back in the chair so that you are properly in contact, your body, with the back of the chair here. Right? So you really want to have the right dimension for the seat depth so that you have as much contact with your legs and the cushion as possible, but so that you're not prevented from sliding all the way back. And I've got slides that say this kind of stuff. Okay? So just to reinforce it, full support along your legs. Also that your legs be stable. And that's an indicator that if your knees are flopping around side to side, that tells you right there that your thighs are not down in contact with the cushion of the chair, which means that there is more force on your bottom than there needs to be, and you really need to do something about that. Okay? And this is also about that issue of body stability so that you can efficiently apply your upper body strength to the act of wheeling the chair. Stabilizing your lower body and your torso is what allows you to use the chair really well and not to be fatigued by it. Okay? And as I said, you need to be able to slide all the way back in the seat so that your back makes full contact with the back of the chair. Okay, so here's this unfortunate girl again in that chair, which is much, much too wide for her. The reason that she is slumping over the way she is, right, you can see it here that her hips are really flopped to the side, is because she's got all this extra and unnecessary space in the chair. When you have the right seat width, then you're not going to even be able to slide over and twist. Keeping your spine straight is so critical to not only your health, but your ability to propel the chair. This is true for power chair users as well. You want to be sitting straight because when your spine is curved and you spend time like that every day, then what you do is you actually are training your spine into that curved shape. You are actually fostering scoliosis in your spine, and that can lead to the discs of your spine becoming compromised. It can lead to the nerve roots that travel out from the spinal cord through the vertebrae becoming pinched, and then major pain problems. So this is something that I maybe you can tell I'm getting a little passionate about this because nobody told me anything about any of this when I was in rehab. They did a great job with me in rehab in Detroit, but nobody said anything about posture. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that my body really wasn't straight anymore, and I had to spend time working with a chiropractor, and I had to retrain my posture in order to get straightened out. And this is a big factor in what you want to be doing when you choose your wheelchair. So you want to avoid chronically being in curved postural positions. It's terrible for your health, right? But it's also about being able to reach the wheels. Look at how her elbows are extended out from her body here to be able to reach the wheel. That's not what should be happening here. Your arms should be able to be more relaxed at the shoulders because when you're extending your elbows out, you're actually forced to use muscles in your shoulders and your upper back continually to be able to do that. That means those muscles are not available to use for propulsion. It also means that they're going to get overstrained, that you are going to be cursed with chronic neck and shoulder discomfort from that. So the proper width is going to allow your arms to be more relaxed when you propel. And we know that the world is full of narrow spaces, whether it's the aisle in a store or between cars in a parking lot or between the couch and dining and the dining room table or no, I don't have a couch next to my dining room table, but between spaces in your home. You don't want your chair to be any wider than necessary because any of us who are full-time wheelchair users already know that fractions of an inch really can make a difference in our ability to get through a certain place, which might mean that we have to go around the long way to get somewhere, or we might not be able to get somewhere at all. And we might be forced into dependency, for instance, in a store because we can't get to something ourselves, and we have to ask for help that we otherwise wouldn't have needed. Right? So you don't want the width of the chair to be any wider than it has to be. And how come I'm not seeing? There it is. This also has to do with skin safety. If your seat is too narrow, then you are at danger of having pressure continually on your trochanters, which many people think are the hips, but they're the bones on the right and left side of our pelvis. And so you need to have a chair that's wide enough that there isn't constant pressure on those bones, because they are high-risk sites for skin breakdown. Okay. Which means that once you specify your wheelchair, you want to take good care of yourself, and you want to have a balanced diet, and you want to maintain a certain level of physical activity, because if you are going to gain weight, now you're going to get squeezed into that chair, and you might run risk of skin breakdown. Not to mention, the heavier you are, then the more weight you're pushing around in the chair, and then the more force you're applying to your shoulders, and then the more of your energy you're using. So maintaining your weight is an important piece of this story. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the back. The height of the back is about your upper body stability. There are a lot of people out there that are using ultralight chairs with very, very, very low backs, but I find them often having to carry themselves with their arms down on their hips, or when they get to a table or something and they're leaning. In other words, I see evidence that their upper body stability is really not that great, and they want a lower back. Often people want to do this because you want the wheelchair itself to be as less a part of the proportion of your physical presence in the world. I hope that makes sense to people. But the less there is of the chair, the more of you there is. And the feeling is that people will interact with you more quickly, and they'll see you more as you. But the most important thing here is the stability and the health of your upper body and your spine and the muscles in your torso and your shoulders and so on. And if your back is too low and you deny yourself the support that you need, then you're running some risk problems. Also, the way wheelchair propulsion actually works is it's a function of the contact of your back with the chair. When you push on the wheels, you're actually applying force between your back and the back of the wheelchair. That's really the magic of it. That's where it happens. So again, when I see people whose wheelchair seat is too deep and they don't have sufficient wheelchair back height, or the angle of the back is wrong and it's angled back too far this way, which means that while you push, you're not actually in contact with the chair, all of those things make it much more difficult to wheel the chair, put your health at risk, and literally causes pain. Also prevents you from being able to do wheelies and so on. This is also true for people who are power wheelchair users, because when you're driving that chair, particularly if you go around a corner, there are forces that are being applied to your body. And the back is what gives you stability so that you can confidently drive that chair where you need to go. Otherwise, you tend to have to go real, real, real slow to make sure that you don't literally throw yourself out of the chair. Okay. So, as I said, with rigid frame chairs, there is the ability to adjust back angle. In that form, you're going to see a certain range of choices. But with manual wheelchairs, typically you cannot change the angle of the back. The one proviso to that is that if you were to change the height of the caster fork, or if you were to change the height of the main axle, then that would influence the angle of the back, but then it's also going to influence the angle of the seat, and you just don't want to get involved in that. You want to get it right up front. Okay. So, also know that it is very common now to get a back that has these Velcro straps that allow you to provide a little bit of shape and change where the support is, particularly to get some support for your lumbar, and that's something that you specify when you order the chair. But there also are third-party products which latch onto the vertical posts of the chair back and can be, some of them have various degrees of shape, and I'm actually trying to indicate this shape in here, that it's kind of sculpted, and that can give you some lateral stability. Also, many of these chair backs have a cushion that goes inside the upholstery that you can move up and down in order to provide yourself with some lumbar support. So you can really customize these. Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about the main wheels. Main wheels come generally in sizes from 22 to 26 inches in size. Note, generally speaking, that the larger the wheel is, the easier it is to push. And that's easy to imagine. If you think about trying to push a very small wheel, imagine how much force it would take to make it go as compared to a larger wheel. But that said, these wheelchair wheels are becoming increasingly more sophisticated and highly engineered. And one of the things that they're doing is designing them to minimize how much force it takes to actually get the wheel wheeling. Right? So it doesn't mean that everybody should be using 26 inches. We're going to talk in a minute about your arm relationship to the wheel. That is the actually greater factor for the size of the wheel. But just know that there's a range of sizes that is one of the choices you will be making. And of course, as we've already seen, wheelchairs are much more customized in terms of the look, the color of the frame, types of upholstery, and the same is true here for the wheels. You have options for colored spokes for some of these wheel designs, not to mention colored tires. Okay, the issue with tires now is width and the depth of the tread. So the depth of the tread is really a function of the kind of surface that you're going to wheel on. If you live in a home that doesn't have thick carpeting in it, frankly, most wheelchair users do much better on harder floors, or you work in a building that has all tiled floors or commercial carpeting, which tends to be very, very firm, then you really don't need tread. But if you are living in a rural area where you're going to be wheeling over grass or fine gravel or surfaces of that sort, then you're going to be more interested in having tread of some kind, particularly major knobby tread like this. But understand that the more tread you have, the more friction you're going to have against the surface, which means that it's going to be harder to push and it's not going to coast as far. So these are trade-offs that you have to understand that you're making. Some people have a couple of sets of wheels with different tires on them depending on where they're going to be going. And this tire here is an extremely common tire on wheelchairs because it sort of splits the difference. The tread is not real deep, it's not too wide, but these wheels here are really designed for pavement and tile and firm carpeting and so on. Okay. So again, these are a function of where you're going to go and what you're going to be doing. Okay, so if you're going to be indoors, you're going to be using a narrower tire without tread, and if you're going to be outdoors, you're going to be using a wider tire with some degree of tread. And the less tread and the thinner the tire, then the further you will coast on a given push. So if you remember what I said earlier, that is going to minimize the amount of energy that you have to apply to push the chair, and it's also going to, over the long term, I'm coming up on 40 years now pushing a wheelchair, and I am glad to say that my shoulders are problem-free thanks to this sophistication of these chairs. Thank goodness these modern chairs came about, and I didn't have to continue to push that other chair for 40 years because my shoulders would have given out, and there are plenty of people who, sadly, their shoulders have given out on them. I want to mention Kevlar here because this is about what goes inside the tire. Most tires come with air tubes, and if you function in places where you might pick up a tack or a nail, or where I lived in Northern California, there were these tiny little burrs that were on the ground in some place that I went on a trail with my dog, and I couldn't believe that they actually managed to puncture my my tube, and I actually got a flat tire. There are a couple of solutions for that. One is Kevlar, which is the material which was designed for police and military for bulletproof characteristics. But it's also possible to get solid inserts that can't lose air. My own experience with solid inserts is that they were not as firm, and that I found you didn't coast as far on a given push. But it's been a while since I've tried them, and people I've met who do use them have said that they've gotten much, much better. So all those things are options that you should explore. And now we're going to talk about the hand rim. The standard ring, and you're seeing these from the side. So this is the little thing that attaches to the wheel. Sorry, I don't have more, but you know what I'm talking about. This is the metal rim that goes around the inside of the wheel, right? This being, am I going to be able to do this? This being the tire. Not so bad after all. And let's get some spokes going here. I'm not going to waste too much time being an artist for you. But the metal ring is what you use to push the chair. There's actually been a lot of attention put on the design of those rings. The standard one is just a ring, and they come in coated surfaces so that they will grip your hand a little better, or they might be titanium or just metal. There are hand rims which have quad knobs, and you can see it right there. And this is a knob that allows somebody who doesn't have the ability to grip with their fingers to use their palm against the knob on the ring in order to propel the chair as well as to do braking. Okay. But there are some really cool designs out there that are addressing this problem, that you have two choices. You either have to grip it all the way right around the ring, which frankly very few, this is another one of those images that doesn't fit reality. Nobody wheels their chair like this. Instead, what people do is they bring their thumb up here, and you actually lay your palm on the tire, and your fingers then wrap around just the edge of the hand rim, and that's how most people using this kind of hand rim push their chair, which means that your palms get very dirty, they get calloused, sometimes the skin might break down and you get little cracks and sores. And the real downside is that whatever you wheel over on the ground is going to end up on your hands. Now many people wear gloves in order to counter that issue. I never liked gloves. I always felt very limited by them, but lots of people do use them. And often because of this issue of getting better grip with the wheels, but also to protect their hands from the kind of stuff that can come up off the ground. But now there are some new designs that are actually very, very interesting, where you can see in both of these cases that the hand doesn't come up onto the tire at all. They are, in this case, this is a wider design that has this well in here that the thumb sits in, which can be coated also to get some traction. Or this design, which is actually more of a standard hand rim ring, but it has this rubber gasket in it. Gasket may not be actually the right word for it, but there's this wonderful flexible rubber piece that is literally fused onto the wheel itself and onto the hand rim, which is squeezy, but also you get a lot of traction on the thumb right here at this point. This happens to be what I'm using at the moment. Nothing that I'm saying about what I do is what you should do. It's all about knowing these choices so that you can identify what is right for you. Because it's also true that my thumbs are constantly a little torn up by using this particular design, but I find overall that I get better grip with my hands. I like not having to have my palms on the tires. Now all these things, of course, cost extra, but you are going to find these hand rim choices on the wheelchair order form. And I know I'm running a little late here. There's so much to talk about. So let's make this point very, very quickly because it's critical. Your arm relationship to the wheel is another top priority for what you're going to achieve here. Now, this is an adjustable frame. You can see in this case that the axle actually can move up and down. This whole structural plate here allows you to change the height. You don't want to have to do that too much. Again, you want to get this as right as possible when you order the chair. But the height of the axle is going to then determine the distance from the, I got to get my drawing going here. Come on. There it is. From where you're sitting on the cushion to where the axle is. And then that is going to influence where your shoulders are and therefore where your hand is going to be. Right? So the wheel size, the axle position, the frame height from the floor is all going to add up to determine where your arm goes. Okay, and I need to get a better picture coming up here. And again, when you make changes in axle height, you're also changing the back angle. Okay. You also are going to identify center of gravity, and that's this dimension right here, the distance of the axle from the vertical frame. And this influences tippability, if you will. The more forward the axle is relative to the back of the chair, then the more easily the chair is going to tip backwards when you push it. So you don't want it to be too far forward. But you also don't want it to be too far back, because you need to do a little bit of tipping. You need to be able to do these little lifts with your casters when you're out in the real world and you encounter changes in height of, a portion of sidewalk or a threshold at a door, all kinds of reasons that this center of gravity specification is really, really important. Okay? And if the axle is too far forward, then another thing that happens is that when you wheel, you can inadvertently be lifting your casters. You don't want that to be happening. You want the force you apply to translate into forward motion, not upward motion. Okay? So center of gravity is really, really crucial. Also, it has to do with the position of your arm. If the wheel is too far forward because the axle is forward, then you can imagine you're going to have to actually reach more forward in order to reach the rim of the chair. Okay? But what you're after is, and this is the critical thing, that you want to basically be able to grasp the wheel at about 10 o'clock, and that when you do the wheeling motion, it should go to about 2 o'clock. And if you can't do that, like this person here is sitting a little too high relative to the wheel, and therefore can't get his hands as far back in order to make the most of that stroke. And another indicator of that is how bent his arm is. You need to be able to bend your elbows in order to make use of your tricep muscles. That's the muscles on this part of the arm here. Super, super critical. Okay, so let's see, how can we move forward here? We have run out of time. There is more to talk about here. And Rob, let me check in with you. Should I continue for the sake of the recording?
Yeah, how much more do you have, you think?
Well, let's see. We need to talk about casters. We need to talk about brakes. And we need to talk about footrests. So
yeah, I think you should. There's a couple questions that have popped up. Maybe if you want to take a quick moment to answer those questions.
Okay. So I'm not seeing those questions.
I will tell you then. One is, should a paraplegic change over to a power wheelchair due to years of being paralyzed and age issues?
Okay. The answer to that is that it's partly a function of whether you've had a well-configured chair, which is not straining your body. The answer really is, as long as your body, you still have the strength, and as long as you're not experiencing chronic pain, then there's no reason to not continue using a manual wheelchair. Myself, I'm trying to stick with a manual chair for as long as I can. But I know as I age, there's a certain point where it does become a risk to your shoulders, where you simply don't have the strength or the stamina that you used to, because that's just what happens with aging. Though I'm back to doing a workout program, so I'm really trying to extend that point as far as I can. So that's the point. You go to a power wheelchair when you really need to. But the first thing that you want to do is take care of yourself and optimize your ability to use the manual chair, because the manual chair uses up more of your calories. You're less likely to gain weight. It helps keep you. There's actually some aerobic cardio qualities to it. So lots of reasons to continue using a manual chair if you can. The other reason that I would get a power chair is because I want to get out onto the trails and places that I can't get on in my manual chair. But that has nothing to do with, with health and safety. Okay, the next question.
And then two more here, and then we can continue on. Do you know of a mechanical chair which automatically removes pressure from vulnerable areas of the buttocks?
The first answer to that is that air type of cushion, like the Roho cushion, because it's a whole series of balloons, part of that design is intended that you can tie off a balloon in places where you need relief from pressure. So they say that you can continue to be active using one of those cushions just by tying off the air from one of those balloons so you're supported around that point. There also are alternating current cushions that are on the market. They're generally intended for power chair users, not so much manual chair users. They've got a little pump and use a battery, obviously, where there is a very gradual but nonetheless effective shifting of the pressure from side to side. Those are designed more with the idea that somebody who is quadriplegic and unable to lift themselves physically, to do pressure relief lifts from the chair, that would allow them to remain in the chair over the longer course of a full day. Tilt and recline or tilt in space wheelchair technology also is about that, to relieve and alternate pressure on your bottom so that you can spend the whole day in the chair and not be at risk.
I have one more. He's identifying himself as a T4 with some back pain and wondering, are there different back cushions for a rigid chair?
Yes, absolutely. I'll go back to that photograph I had of it. Where to go? Here we go. This is the one right here. This is actually not three different backs. This is the sort of superstructure of the back. This is sort of a cushion which could have gel in it or be a foam type, and this is the upholstery part here. So there is a whole family from a number of different providers of these kinds of rigid back chairs that you can choose different degrees of lateral support. You can shift the angle of the back. It attaches onto the uprights of the chair, and also can be supplemented for lumbar support in specific positions and so on and so forth. So the answer?
Okay, yeah, then I would say let's pick up and let's finish this off. We've got a good audience tuned in, and they seem to want the rest of the show, so let's do it.
Great. Well, thanks for sticking around, and thanks for understanding that there's so much information here that it's really hard to do it in an hour. And I've tried not to talk any faster or add any fluff or tangents than I've had to, but now I'm already doing it. Okay, so clothing guards. All wheelchairs have the option of different kinds of clothing guards. They can be cloth, which means that when the chair folds, they'll fold up with it. Often they are some kind of a rigid thing, and you can see that they have these little uprights that then would attach down into these inserts that clamp onto the chair itself. There also is a type, and I'm not sure that it's indicated here, but there's a type that will flip down. That's supposed to be kind of a circular arrow kind of thing. So that, for instance, in a rigid chair, the clothing guards would flip down flat onto the seat, and then you flip the back of the chair down on top of them. In folding chairs, very often the clothing guards are built into armrests, so there's just sort of a metal or plastic surface there that serves to protect you from the wheels. You don't want to be getting your clothes dirty from the wheels, but you also don't want the wheels rubbing against your skin because of the risk of skin damage from that. Okay, now we need to talk about casters, the small wheels in the front, and this is actually a really important conversation. And we're going to sort of break it down into smaller ones and large ones. Okay, small ones are really popular now with full-time manual wheelchair users, and that's because they tend to be more nimble. You can make turns more quickly and easily with a smaller caster than a larger caster, because that big caster has to sort of cover more of a larger radius of spinning around. And I don't mean the spinning of the wheel. I mean the spinning of the whole assembly parallel to the ground. Right? So smaller casters are just kind of quicker. You're seeing people that are using small casters like this one here, which are literally the size of a skateboard wheel or an inline skate kind of a wheel. Okay. Small ones can be stopped easily, and I mean when you don't want them to be stopped easily. So if you picture that you're wheeling along on a surface here, and it's nice and smooth, and all of a sudden, there's a change in height here, right? Well, now this wheel is not going to get over that. It's going to be stopped by by it right there, which means that the chair is going to be stopped, and that means that you are going to fall out, which means you have to be much more vigilant when you use these small casters at paying attention to the surface that you're wheeling on. I mean, we should all be really vigilant about it all the time anyway, but this is another issue. When you have a small caster, you've got to be that much more careful about any change in the surface as you wheel forward, because you're at more danger of being stopped literally in your tracks because of that small caster. Right? Smaller casters are not going to have any air in them, so you don't have to worry about any leaking or so on. This issue is not really a small or large caster issue. It's a general caster issue, especially if you live with somebody who has long hair, or you've got a dog that sheds with long hair. You've got to keep your axles clean. You literally have to remove the caster from the caster fork to clean all the gunk out of the axle, and that hair can actually get into the bearings itself, which means that the wheel is not going to turn so easily. And I actually had an experience once where my casters got so bound up with hair because I wasn't paying up attention, and because I had just recently begun to live with somebody who had long hair, and I literally had to buy new casters because there was no going back. Okay. All right, so another thing about small casters is that there are third-party caster forks. This whole assembly here is the caster fork that holds the wheel, right, and attaches it to an axle. That is has shock absorption characteristics. There's actually right here a polyurethane plug, and the caster itself pivots at this point, so that when you're wheeling forward, now instead of just being stopped by, say, this curb that you've just encountered here, but the wheel is more able to go over it. Actually, I'm going in the wrong direction. The wheel would be traveling in this direction, because the fork itself can flex in order to deal with it. So I didn't use small casters for a long time because I like soft rides. But then when these shock absorption caster forks came along, I made the switch, and it's nice because I don't have to worry about losing air. Okay, so large casters. Large casters are going to get caught on the side. And I'm sorry I don't have an image to indicate this, but any of you who've used larger casters know that if you pull up along a sink, for instance, and then you want to move, you might find yourself like suddenly you can't move because the caster is trying to rotate outward to the side, but it is stopped by the wall that you're next to, or the baseboard of a cabinet that you happen to be against. So you have to kind of move backwards and move in a specific thing to sort of get yourself freed. So there can be a little bit of fussing around sometimes when you have larger casters. But casters that are larger can more easily roll over changes in height. And depending on your cognitive ability, depending on your skills physically with the wheelchair, depending on just your own personal preference, you might want to use a larger caster. I used to always use larger casters because of the softness of the ride. Because I really liked using a caster like this. This is 6 inches inside. You can see that it is pneumatic. It does have air in it, but it was really a nice soft ride. You just didn't feel any of those little vibrations from the pavement and so on and so forth. But the trade-off of getting the smaller caster for greater nimbleness, to not get stuck against baseboards, and to not have air anymore, that has what's been working for me now for the last number of years. Okay, so that's the issue with casters. All right, now let's talk about brakes. Or actually, brakes is not the right word. Wheel locks is really the word that I should be using, so forgive me. Some people actually care about this a lot, but it's pretty flexible. But what I care about more than the actual language is that you use them. There are people out there that are using manual wheelchairs without brakes, and it is a terrible risk to your comfort, to your spine, to your safety. Because these wheelchairs are so nimble, they glide so easily, they're so well balanced, they move so easily. When you're on a floor, there's just the slightest bit of an angle, you're just going to roll backwards because these chairs are so well engineered now. That means that if you pull up to a table and you want to grab something and you're going to lean forward, then the chair is just going to slide away simply because of the physical sort of reaction and equal and opposite reaction of your chair sliding away from you, which means that you have to grab something with your other arm to keep yourself from sliding around. This is just one example of a whole array of reasons why not having wheel locks, not having brakes for your chair actually makes a lot more work for you and really causes a lot of back strain. So use the brakes. So the issue is what kind to get. Well, the standard type is the type that we see here, where you push on something in order to cause this contact here between a little knobby metal something that literally pushes against the wheel and then causes it to break. Okay, that is the standard design. They come in designs that you can either push forward or you pull backward, depending, again, on your dexterity and your strength and what works best for you. And also, it is possible to extend the lever that you're kind of seeing here, this sort of wheelchair brake handle right in here. It can be lengthened, which gives you more leverage and requires less strength in order to operate them. Okay, so those are options that are just available for you. Actually, let's go back an image. The concern that a lot of people have is about jamming your thumb here when you are actually pushing the wheel. Now, if that is happening, then you're probably sitting too low in relationship to the wheel. So on one level, that shouldn't happen so easily because maybe your hands shouldn't get quite down that far. But I'm not going to overstate that because, frankly, I'm just doing it on my chair right now. And I do go down that far. But remember those new hand rim designs where you don't have to have your palm and your thumb on the tires? That's another benefit of them, is that your stroking of the wheel does not put your thumb anywhere near being in contact with this. And yes, when your thumb jams on that thing, it is painful. It really, really hurts. So part of it is also about developing just the skill of you simply do not let your hands go down there, and you just habituate to it. But another solution to that problem of your thumbs is this scissors style wheel lock, where when you release it, it literally flips all the way back around, and it's nowhere near where your thumbs are going to be. But the downside of it is that the handle to do it is underneath the frame, and you have to bend your wrist and exert your fingers in a way that, frankly, is not good for your wrist. It literally is a risk for carpal tunnel syndrome if you're somebody who is so active, so active that you are operating that brake on and off many, 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 many times a day. It can be a risk, and especially if you have to apply a lot of force to it, depending on how you have it properly adjusted or not. Okay? If it's too tight, then it is more exertion for your hand and your wrist, and therefore represents a danger. There are some cool designs that are coming out there now of literally doing hub or disc kind of brakes. And I hope you can see what's going on here, but this is the wheel, this is the frame right here. This hole here is where the axle of the wheel would go in, so that this hub style brake here literally would press against another plate, and it's just like disc brakes in your car. And there's a little hydraulic handle that causes this thing to work that is attached to your frame. Obviously, these are going to cost a lot more money. They add a lot of weight to your chair, and they have yet to really take hold as something that's standard. But the designs are out there. And then there is an accessory called a hill holder, and it's this plastic ridge thing that we see here, right there. See those ridges there? What they do is they allow the wheel to just glide over them while the wheel is turning. How come I can't get, there we go. While the wheel is turning around it here, it just doesn't, limit it at all. But when the wheel goes back in the other direction, then the hill holder literally grabs against the wheel, and it makes it so that it's impossible for you to wheel backwards. So if you don't have great hand grip and you're going up a ramp, then this is a great solution for you because it lets you push forward, but you don't have to worry about repositioning your hands really, really fast so you don't wheel backwards because it prevents you literally from wheeling backwards. Okay? Common accessory. Okay, footrests. So I've already said a little bit about this, that footrests are integrated into the rigid frame design, or there are swing-away footrests that you can choose for a folding frame chair. You have choices about how forward the angle is of the footrest. And that is going to have to do with the stability of your foot on the foot plate. Has to do with the closer the angle is in, then the shorter the overall distance of your wheelchair, the size of your wheelchair, and you can turn around in tighter spaces. Again, there are some footrests are always adjustable in terms of height, and sometimes they're adjustable in terms of angle, but typically not. The footrests are swing away in a folding frame chair. They also, because the angle typically is farther out, then you also have these heel loops to keep your foot from sliding off. And there is at least one, if not two, rigid frame wheelchair designs out there that do have swing away footrests. Okay. So just a couple of more categories just to touch, and then we're going to be just about done. And that is the category of power assist. And this is a hybrid between power wheelchairs and manual wheelchairs. But rather than operating it with a joystick, you are pushing on the wheel as you would in a normal manual wheelchair, right? So see, she's literally grabbing the wheel. But this chair has got motors in the wheels, and there's a little battery pack. And power assist chairs respond to your pushing on the wheel. So it's different. You're not driving it like a power chair. You're pushing it like a manual chair, but you're getting some assist from the motors and the batteries. Of course, these chairs are much heavier because of all this equipment. You are therefore subject to battery life once again. But some people have a normal set of wheels and a power set of assist set of wheels, and they switch them out according to what they're going to be doing. And I know some people who are in that low to medium quadriplegia range who have given up their joystick-driven power chair and now spend all their time using power assist technology. And this is still fairly young technology. I think that it's going to continue to improve. Hopefully the prices will come down and it'll be available for more people. And so thinking of that person in that low to medium quadriplegia range, it also means now that they're using their body a little more. It means that they're getting more range of motion in their shoulders. It means that they're using their triceps and their arm muscles and maintaining strength. It means they're burning some calories. So there are a lot of reasons to be doing that. And also, it means that these chairs can be stowed more easily in the trunk of a car. You can be carried upstairs in this chair where you can't in a power chair. So there are a whole bunch of reasons why this technology is appealing, and hopefully it will continue to mature and evolve. And then the last thing to mention is shock absorption. This chair literally has shock absorbers at the main wheels. And so if you're somebody who, for instance, jumps up and down curbs a lot, if you're somebody who lives in a rural setting and you've got bumpy terrain that you tend to go over, or if you're just, a hot dog user, always safely, hopefully, but you do lots of banging around on the chair, the shock of our bouncing on a wheelchair, if we go down a curb or whatever we're doing, that actually has impact on our spine. And over years and years of being a wheelchair user, that impact, that vibration, that shock actually can have some impact on the health of our spine over time. But of course, this kind of wheelchair is going to be heavier. It's going to cost a little bit more. It might have some maintenance issues that come up with it. So a very small proportion of the manual wheelchair product line out there has shock absorption as an option. but there are some good products, and the shock absorption is often adjustable. And the softer the springiness, actually, then again you start losing efficiency, where when you're pushing on the wheel, it's going to get lost in the springiness of that shock and not translate as efficiently into forward movement. So this is kind of a special use thing that, again, you need to specify very, very carefully and choose it for the right reasons. So once again, I'm just going to show you this measuring image just to emphasize how customized this chair is, how much it needs to fit you, your body, your physical capacity, your lifestyle, your choices, where you live, where you go, what you're going to do with your life. And so try not to be too flipped out by the complexity of this. Hopefully I've given you a really good overall orientation to it. Continue to study this stuff. If you're about to enter into the process of selecting a wheelchair, learn as much as you can. The people that you're working with, don't let them just make decisions for you. Ask them why they are recommending a specific thing. Know why these choices are being made. Because as we know, you only get funded for a wheelchair every so often, and so you really want to get it right. And that means being educated because it's so complex, but understanding that the complexity really is what gives you the opportunity to improve the quality of your life, improve your mobility, preserve your energy, optimize your health, and all the rest. Okay, so I see that we already have another question. Rob, I see that Anna is asking, thought it was unsafe to be carried in your wheelchair because the equipment could fail, such as a loose bolt and so on. Well, if you have a loose bolt in your chair, I'm really glad you brought this up, because this is about maintenance of the chair. This is about taking care of your chair, which is a very precious, sophisticated device that obviously we really care about it surviving and doing well. If you've got a loose bolt or something, then your chair is going to get a little kind of jiggly underneath you. That should be a clue right away that tells you your chair needs maintenance. You must not allow yourself to function with a loose bolt. That's a problem that you should be conscious of and respond to right away. When I am carried in my wheelchair, because sometimes there are situations with steps where I want to go there, and so I'm going to get the right people to come and assist me, but I also teach them not to just lift me and carry the chair, but to use the wheels of the chair against the step. And when you are actually being wheeled up one step at a time or down one step at a time using the wheels, then you're not putting that kind of exertion on the frame, which could present some kind of a risk. But the most key point here is that if you're in the right chair and you've taken care of it and it's well maintained and it's tight, then being carried up a few stairs, is not going to cause a bolt to break. And if it does, that's because you haven't been taking care of the chair. Okay. So.
Excellent. I don't see any other questions.
It's time to hand it back to you.
Excellent. Nice job, Gary. Thank you. And thank everybody for tuning in. I just want to remind you that as soon as I get in tomorrow, I will upload this whole event up into our christopherreeve.org/webcast. It's up on the chat screen as well. So you can tune in, or if you missed part of it, or if you just want to use it like I would use it, which is like a reference guide to how to do this, or share with other people. It'll be up there for that. So thank you, Gary, and thank you, everybody else, for joining us today.
Thank you, Rob.